quick comment on so-called nuclear waste. In 60 years of production of electricity.
Speak up, Marty.
In 60 years of production of electricity in the United States from atomic power, there has not been one civilian either killed or even sickened in any way from radiation from nuclear waste. Contrast that to 20,000 people in the US a year, or 200,000 in the world at large, who died as a result of the routine use of coal to produce electrical power. Another comment on so-called nuclear waste. The total amount of spent nuclear fuel from power production reactors over the last 60 years in the US would not even half fill a Costco warehouse. Of that amount, about 95% to 97%, depending on what reactor and how it was run and what fuel it used and blah, 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 about 95 to 97% is uranium, which is pretty harmless with half-lives of 4.5 billion and 3/4 billion years. If that is extracted out, you have 1/20th as much of the spent fuel left. It's certainly true that some of that spent fuel is horrible, deadly, and in many respects useless. Strontium-90 and cesium-137 are horrifically deadly, highly radioactive materials, strontium in particular because it's bone-seeking. However, both strontium-90 and cesium-137 can be separated out, 1/20th of the total amount of waste. Their half-life is 30 years. That means that after 300 years of storage, 1/1000th of that remains. After 600 years of storage, 1/1,000,000th of that remains. So this stuff about high-level waste needing to be stored for thousands or tens of thousands of years is absolutely pure bunk. Okay. And you really should understand that.
Time is up?
Yes, your time's up. Thank you. Okay. You?
No, I don't have any.
All right.
Well, with that, what about, this is a technical question, what is this thing about thorium, nuclear, which I would suppose, I understand is developed in China, and fusion?
Okay.
That's a question.
Yes, I answer. I'll wait till I can answer.
Well, no,
You can't answer it now?
Can I answer it now?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, just a technical, I won't respond to Mark
quickly, though.
until afterward, but because it involves longer. Thorium, you're right, thorium is about 4 times more plentiful than uranium. And it is a fertile material. That is, when you expose it to neutrons, it decays, and after a month you have uranium-233, which is a truly excellent form of fuel. So why aren't people using it? Well, because there's 2 things against it. One is, it's very difficult to make nuclear weapons from thorium. You end up with plutonium-240 or uranium-240, and it poisons the fissionable action that you would get with normal thorium, thorium-239, I think it is. And so because of that, the military uranium complex is not interested in that. So why put any money into it? So they didn't. There was a thorium experiment that was conducted by Alvin Weinberg in 1960. They had a molten salt reactor where the fuel's already molten in beryllium salts, and they were able to produce energy, actually, for a long time. It was an experimental reactor. They're easier to build. They can run at atmospheric pressure. If you pull the plug, you can walk away, and the reaction and the radioactivity collapses. So why aren't we using it? Because the other part of that military uranium complex is the uranium industrial complex. GE, Westinghouse, etc., all have a lot of investment in uranium fuels. Even my friend Ed doesn't want to touch thorium because there's no regulations for it. It's a big pain in the ass. So the Chinese don't have that problem, so the Chinese have put $100 million into developing thorium. India has the most amount of money because they have no uranium, they have a lot of thorium. And they're the second largest after Australia of thorium. I'm not going to talk about fusion because nobody's really talking about fusion. It's always 30 years away. And it'd be great when we have it. And I also wish we had unicorns that would shit gold, but we don't have it. So I'm not a big fusion fan because of that.
Gene?
Look it up, though. Look up thorium. It's worth it.
I'll hold my comments.
Okay.
Maybe for
so
years.
maybe what we'll do is take, okay, Rich, But what we're going to do is maybe take 2 questions at a time. Might be better to do that because that way we are sure. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm finding this very interesting, but I'm not convinced. So my big question, and
You're not convinced of Gene or me?
any of you, whatever. Well, I think me and Gene are on the same track, but you all scientists or whatever are, I mean, well, I'll speak for, I love science. I like to hear a good scientific argument that at least there's a hypothesis that can be ripped apart or whatever. And I'm sorry, what's your friend's name?
Marty.
Marty, thank you, Marty.
He just went to the bathroom.
Yeah, brought up the waste. And so I went, oh, finally somebody said, not just the power and the weapons, but the waste. And then he said the opposite of what I want to believe. But I'm really, I've never heard the argument made that well, let alone, convincingly to me against my argument, is that the political aspect of this whole thing is politics is like uranium and strontium and all this shit is unstable. We never know where the hell it's going. I mean, we don't know. There's no blueprint. There's nothing that said ever says that things are going to come out like we want them to. So now we've got climate change. We've got seas rising. I was at Diablo Canyon when 29 of us or 59 of us, I think, got arrested and not prosecuted because the company or somebody had an FBI or somebody agent with a knife inside that we shut the whole thing down, so all of us that got arrested couldn't get prosecuted because they compromised our defense. My bottom line is that however many nuclear power plants or whatever,
100 in the United States.
yeah, 100, I'd love that. Yeah, I hadn't heard that exactly.
A little less.
I could have thought more, but okay, 100, that's a lot. So I always say, when people piss on Oakland about all the crime and the killing and stuff like that, I says, you know what, it's a big city. Anytime you get 1,000 people together, it only takes one person on drugs or not on drugs when they should be, or crazy, to create a mess. The other 999 can be angels and taking care of each other, and so we're just normal. And but it's the same thing. You got 100 plants. It only takes one plant to screw up, like Chernobyl or so. I'm not saying it's waiting to. I'm just saying that something can go wrong. Things don't always go like we plan them to.
But your time is up.
Go for it. You got the drift.
Okay, start with that side.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I just got these 2 articles out of the paper yesterday. One. What?
Well, it's
No,
not.
Go ahead and talk about it.
Oh, it's on the Chronicle.
Oh,
It's in the Chronicle. The U.S. and Russia have abandoned the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, raising fears of a new arms race. Then it says U.S. plans new missile test after demise of treaty. The United States plans to test a missile in coming weeks that would have been prohibited under a landmark 32-year-old arms control treaty that the U.S. and Russia ripped up on Friday. And then here's another one. Activists assail plan to bail out nuclear and coal plants. A financial rescue for Ohio's nuclear facilities and 2 coal-fired plants that will force the state's residents and businesses to fork over approximately $1.5 billion is galvanizing environmentalists and some conservatives. The upheaval comes as the Trump administration continues with its pledge to boost the nuclear and coal industry by easing regulations and guaranteeing loans for 2 new commercial reactors. Anyway, that's just part of these 2 articles. Maybe you could respond.
Sure, love to.
Okay, shall we take more questions or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr.
Well, Gene's not here, but.
Yeah, so maybe we'll take one
Yeah, take
more
another question.
comment. Gigi? Nothing?
It's interesting to me. I'm just saying that I had a totally different understanding before I came to this room.
Nina? Okay, Jay.
Later, I was going to mostly ask questions of Gene.
Okay.
Okay,
EMF things, I mean, I sort of threw that out earlier and you said, no, it's okay, but you know, I did have my PG&E smart meter removed, but you know, I do understand that it's all over the neighborhood, so big deal, I had mine removed. And so, have you heard anything about these, is it 5G or G5 towers that they're building?
Oh, yeah.
And if so, what do you think about them?
Okay, Gene might take time, so you maybe
Yes.
want to
I'll
answer
ask
this one.
there's no bad questions here. I'll go ahead and start sort of in reverse order.
Yeah.
So I work in the electrical industry and I was part of a union. I was part of a union company safety investigation in 1991 about EMFs. We generate EMFs that you couldn't even measure because your meter would blow up. I mean, huge amounts of radio frequency, magnetic frequency, electromagnetic, the realm of electromagnetic forces, frequencies. It's a very complicated, broad subject, but there was only a hint of anything, any of the studies done, one by a Russian study and one on a Swedish study, but this is back in the 1980s, that showed any remote possibility of a statistical increase in any kind of a problem. We have electromagnetic forces around us all the time, whether it's not at the frequency in which you're talking about, but from these lights up here to cosmic radiation that comes down. There's no evidence, in my opinion, that ever said that EMF causes any harm whatsoever. And the anti-smart meter campaign, which sends radio signals out in an omnidirectional way and is by the square of the number of the frequency at its origin decreases as it gets further away. Now I'm probably sounding like PG&E on this, but because they know the science. In this case, they're right. And there was nothing wrong. People who had it removed made a mistake, in my opinion. It's no different than your cell phone. I don't even want to talk about cell phones. I'm sorry for bringing that up. And 5G, though, is similar to that. And there's no evidence yet that there's no even a hypothesis that 5G is harmful to people. You know, people like this guy sitting here, who's a ham radio operator for 20 years, was in front of transmitters, 300-watt transmitters, that was converted completely to radio waves. He would have been a dribbling idiot if there was an iota of truth behind any of this stuff. I would have brain cancer because I was by this giant EMF output device called a generator, which puts a DC field on things. Anyway, there's really no problem with that, in my opinion. So that's my educated opinion, working in the energy industry on your question. I know it's a very common
That's
question.
the general scientific.
Yeah, it's a general scientific question. It has nothing to do with
No, principle.
principle.
Non-ionizing radiation, like EMF, causes no medical harm,
Okay.
period. I'm a physician who
So-
studied effects of radiation.
The other question, Rich had a question, you had a question. You had two articles, one on the disastrous withdrawal by the United States of the treaty, the only thing worth supporting in the Reagan administration, which was the agreement between the USSR, Gorbachev, and the United States through Reagan, of lowering the number of nuclear weapons and the verification of that. And that was something I support. I mean, I don't like supporting treaties like this. I'm for unilateral nuclear disarmament. But now Trump's actually stepped on it and destroyed it completely. Though, to be fair, the Russians have been violating. There's pretty much consensus in the anti-proliferation community that the Russians have been violating the treaty for about 6 or 7 years now also. So both these leaders have been destroying the non-proliferation, destroying all the agreements, and they're effing disasters, in my opinion. So I'm just responding to some of the questions.
And then the bailout.
Oh, the bailout. So that's an interesting question. They did a similar bailout in New Jersey. What the Chronicle article fails to mention is that an equal amount of money went to solar energy in the subsidy bill as well. Just so you know. It's coal, nuclear, and solar. And I don't like the idea of subsidy. He brought up the thing about the subsidy that was passed in Ohio, Gene. I don't like subsidizing anything, including solar. Because if we didn't have subsidies for solar and wind, there wouldn't be any.
Right.
Because it has the highest rate of subsidies per unit of energy produced than any form, even nuclear, including the Manhattan Project. On a per unit of amount of energy that's produced, it doesn't, nuclear doesn't come close to what's been subsidized in terms of energy. Look, I'm just very briefly, just one thing. You know, our species doesn't have a lot of time in terms of fighting the climate change. And nuclear energy seems to me, this is what converted me really over to supporting nuclear. It's that, you know, you can have all sorts of things about costs, like how much does it cost to put in a solar panel, but that's only a little part of the cost. It's really, building a wind turbine is only, a solar panel will work for 20, 25 years before it doesn't put out anything anymore. Well, a nuclear plant, for whatever the cost is, goes for at least 60 years. So when you talk about costs, it gets very complex and very, so if you're asking me would I vote for that? Yeah, I would. I'd throw up afterward, but I would vote for that. Subsidizing coal, I mean, Jesus, you know. My whole point of all this is that we have to phase out coal first, then natural gas with non-carbon energy, low carbon energy. And this bill in a way helps do that to a certain degree because it keeps nuclear alive. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing, even if it subsidizes the damn limousines of the major stockholders of, you know, Duke Power and Entergy, which are the two companies that own power plants in Ohio. And you also find, by the way, that solar is also produced by Entergy and Duke. Wind, yeah, so go ahead. I'm
Which is
sorry.
worse, fracking or nuclear?
No, okay, so fracking, I'm just answering these questions. You know, fracking,
We need to keep moving.
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
We
okay,
should.
Gene,
I'll answer it later.
Gene, your turn to respond.
Yeah, I just do want to say a couple things.
Yeah, turn it on.
I want to say a couple things. Okay. First of all, I don't claim to be an expert on nuclear power or any kind of electrical engineering and the power issues. But as we used to say back in the 60s, you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And I smell something real foul from that direction. So I want to be very careful. Now, I will confess that although I'm not an expert, I do engage in a lot of intellectual guerrilla warfare in terms of finding out enough about something, for example, nuclear
Energy.
weapons. I mean, I think there's enough lies and so forth, which are commonplace among, you know, I think most people would say, yeah, we need those weapons to protect ourselves from the Soviet Union, which is total bullshit. Not only, as you pointed out, the Soviet Union is basically peace-loving. It doesn't want it wants anything other than war. And that's always been true. And the threat of war has always been from the United States. And we've killed something like 20 to 30 million people in our various wars. Regime change wars from Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and so forth. So we need to, I think, understand the role of the United States, the negative role. And I tend to be an American exceptionalist in that I see, you know, America is uniquely evil in terms of what we've done, and we have a particular responsibility as Americans and workers and socialists to deal with that. But I will have more to say later on.
Okay, so maybe I get to make a comment or question here. So, okay, I actually, it so happened that I was a second year student when a professor from, is it on? No.
Yeah. But you have to hold it close to your mouth.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a professor from Princeton taught me computers. It was the first introduction to computer. He had worked in the Manhattan Project as a computer expert. My objection to nuclear weapons is that nuclear industry as well as weapons, I think we all agree. So it's got nuclear power, is about its safety. And it's tied with the nuclear weapons. And I think you have argued, David, that they need not be connected. I mean, they may have started that way, but by and large it's not. And it's true that a couple of countries have a lot of power from there. But I think the real contradiction is not about the form of power, but as Gene pointed out, is with the mechanism of extracting surplus labor and wealth creation in which capital begins to dominate. And I think all this nuclear energy is, like other sources, coal also become under their hand. And they have created now a consumerist economy which is voracious on the planet. So until I think we have overcome capitalism, all these problems will remain. We can't even have it's very difficult to have rational discussion, because if you change the form of energy, then they will do something else with the other thing. But what's most threatening to humanity is the nuclear energy's its out of control effect. Pollution is one of them, chain reaction is another one. And no matter how much somebody convinces me that has all been taken care of, a doubt remains in my mind. Okay, and I'm an engineer like David, so I'm given to rational thinking. So, but with that comment, I would like to see if somebody else has a comment or question, and you guys can react to it. And then I think we still have time. Yeah, Gigi. Yeah, you want to use microphone?
Well, no.
Okay.
What's wrong with, it sounded like people think that there's something wrong with solar power. And there was a couple things that were said, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I should have wrote it down. But when you say a word or initials or whatever, please explain what it is. Because, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not the only one that doesn't follow it.
Before they answer, and I think David has said something in Gene, I just want to say that there's Sandeep Agarwal, who has a PhD and has worked all his life in solar industry, will be making a presentation here. I've asked him, and he counteracts David's argument. So you will hear him soon. The solar power now at this stage is very effective and can solve the problems. Sandeep Agarwal.
Oh, is he going to speak?
No, he's going to finish.
One other thing I wanted to say, and that is that, it seems pretty clear that if you don't have nukes, we will overthrow your government. Just look at all the 10 that we're bombing every day all over the world. None of them have nukes. We don't.
That's
you
true.
don't get Korea.
I hate to say it.
Because North Korea has nukes,
right.
and so people need to have nukes. I mean, yes, we need a thing to get them all gone, but I can see why a country. I mean, Libya, if they'd had a nuke, we wouldn't have stuck a thing up his butt. Anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe we should finish everybody before we go to second.
Okay, yeah. Anybody else who has not spoken? Jerry, you haven't spoken
Okay,
yet.
well, I found this somewhat confusing. I have appreciation for people having wonky expertise, and I can't follow it that much. And I don't feel like my opinion is strongly against it, but I have that both with solar power and the whole thing of how energy has come in. I was very interested in philosophy of nature back in the 70s when it first came in, but it developed into all these things about programs for it coming into being that I couldn't keep up with all the wonkiness of it, And I have some doubts about that in terms of I don't know that it can take place under capitalism, under domination of any sort. I mean, the forces have to get together to do it. I also obviously been thinking of the wonkiness because except for George Mollibot, the things about defending nuclear energy are the only things I've heard, and I don't read all of them. I don't quite know how to deal with that. I'm not going to become that kind of an expertise, and I don't know where my judgments come from, that I will still have to have an opinion of what I think in some way.
Okay, you guys can respond to it, his comment, or do you not want to respond to any of these things?
I would suggest we go on until we get.
Okay, any other person who has not spoken? You have not spoken, so please go ahead.
I agree that the overthrow of capitalism is the salvation of our species. Okay, I agree with that. The problem is, with the climate crisis, we can't wait till capitalism is overthrown. We have to deal with it right now, because we're already probably too late for many of the big effects to occur. So we have to get it right. We have to deal with it, and I think that nuclear has a 60-year safety track record of producing carbonless emissions, and I think that's the way. That's the right now that we have a real solution that really works. Look at France. Look at some of these countries who are getting, big proportions of their energy from nuclear. It's clean, it's efficient, and it's carbonless, and it's here now. No.
Jake? Yeah.
Yeah, who was the man who created the whole word catalog?
Stuart Brand?
Stuart Brand.
Yeah, Stuart Brand came out as well as James Hansen, he said, to support nuclear. And the reasoning was that they said it was safer than fracking coal oil. Yeah, and also there's trillions of dollars of oil and coal in the earth, and they don't want it to go to waste, which is a major problem. But you can't call nuclear clean energy with a risk involved.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other comments before I think we will go for the final 5 minutes wrap up, and you can address some of these issues in that. Is that okay? You can take more than 5 minutes, but any other questions or comments? Doesn't look like it. So, it's a highly technical subject.
Yes.
So, I think, who wants to go first?
You want to go first?
I'll go first. You
Okay.
can go last. You started first, you get to go last, I guess. So all these are good questions, really. And the reason I'm here today is not to convince you that nuclear energy is the way to go. I just merely want to plant some questions in your mind and your doubts, and because the left is knee-jerk pro-green, pro-renewable, and we shouldn't be knee-jerk about anything. We should really try to investigate a little bit, even if it's Wikipedia. At least Wikipedia has the sources. So you can look up thorium, for example, and they have a really good write-up on thorium, and then all the links inside it about thorium reactors that don't use uranium ore. So it's worth planning this stuff, like when you look for solar versus nuclear. Look it up. Look up the different items. You'll learn something. Most of the items are anti-nuclear, but you should still read it anyway. Anyway, so I wanted to answer some of the questions. Fracking. The reason the fracking industry exists today is primarily because of solar and renewable energy. The problem with solar, and this should come up at the forum with the guy from the solar industry, is, I'll show you the problem with solar right now. This is a grid. I just got it live off the California Independent System Operator. Okay, so what this is midnight, right? So this is a day. This is the load. This is like 20,000 megawatts at the bottom. This is about 45,000 megawatts on a hot day throughout the day. This is 6 a.m. I'm sorry. I had it upside down. This is 6 a.m. and that's 8 p.m. That's the peak load when we need the most. Here's solar. That's this line right here. Do you see the problem? The sun doesn't come out. You can't make solar energy. You can't generate it. So you need a way to provide on-demand generation, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's natural gas. Hydro also, but that's limited. So this is the main problem with solar energy, that you don't produce solar energy when there's no sun. Last winter, when it was cloudy, the same graph that shows production of solar energy on the California ISO website was like way down here, way down at the bottom for megawatts because there was no sun. That's a problem Germany has, which has tremendous amounts of wind and solar energy. And so my response is that you can't have solar energy and renewable energy, to answer your questions about this, without having a natural gas. I worked on building natural gas plants in California and Texas. The reason we did it, it was all told to us. This was not an environmental organization. It was a bunch of good old boys from Texas who said, "Oh yeah, well, a wind plant is a gas plant," because they know they have to have the gas fill in gas power generation to fill in when the wind dies, which is very hard to predict. Solar energy, admittedly, is a lot more predictable. But even within solar energy, if you looked at this chart and you blew it up on a minute-by-minute basis, it would look like this. Because the clouds go by and there's different reasons that you don't get solar energy. You need to fill that in, because what determines how healthy the grid is when that line is perfectly flat. So you run at 60 hertz. You drop down to 59 hertz and you'll fry your computers. In fact, the grid will go offline. It won't let that happen.
Can you store the energy?
Well, that's the second thing. So now you'll hear, very recently actually, a lot more talk about storage. So we're talking about batteries. In fact, if you go back and look at the slide that Gene provided with the house that had the wind turbine and the solar cells on it, in the bottom on the lower left-hand corner, it said batteries. So basically, the advocates of that road is to build a hazardous waste dump in your basement with banks of batteries. Even as batteries have gotten more dense, which is a good thing, they're still phenomenally expensive. To produce enough electricity to store enough electricity for a day, right now in California, you would need a battery bank the size of Manhattan. That's 20 miles by 4 miles or something to that effect. It's huge amount. Think about the extractive material of lithium. There isn't even enough lithium in the world to actually do that. I'm not against the storage. I mean, I think personally, storage works better with nuclear energy than it does with solar, because you can do the same, you can apply it the same way. You can continue to produce or build a grid with X amount of generators, knowing that during the day you can store it and play it back at night, even if you don't have enough generators to produce that much electricity. To me, it's phenomenally expensive. It's environmentally unsound. It's not reliable. And so those are the reasons I don't see solar as an answer to climate change. We need vast, even with the issue of, who brought it up? You brought it up. The whole thing about nature and returning to a more holistic lifestyle. You're still going to need vast amounts of electricity. There's 1.2 billion people in the world who don't have any electricity at all. They demand now some electricity. Well, some electricity means hundreds of power plants, thousands of power plants, and the sun won't be able to do it. And these countries are developing whether we like it or not. I agree, we need to overthrow capitalism, because otherwise it'll come back and bite us in the ass every day they can. But Robin's correct. We need transitional demands and solutions right now to demand society build the kind of low-carbon grid that we need. And I cast my vote with nuclear on that basis. Just the only other thing, the other questions were, did EMF? Yeah, we did the EMF thing. So nuclear doesn't go out of control. The whole point of, whoever said that, I think it was you said, is that if you know physics and you have any kind of idea of how a nuclear power plant works, the whole point of it is that it can't go out of control. It can't go out of control because the immediately fissionable material is only about 4%. Now, if you're at 90%, like the reactors on a nuclear submarine, they do run at 90%. That's why they only have to load them every 30 years with fuel. In theory, you could get an uncontrolled nuclear reaction and have an explosion. But if you look at the meltdowns in the United States, which is really one that was close to being dangerous, which was... Oh, okay. I was going to say 3 Mile Island, and I could talk about that another time.
3 Mile Island was close.
Yeah, it's not even close.
Okay.
Well, thank you. And thank you. We started this because we didn't know what we were going to do today. So I said, hell, I'll do that thing on nuclear power, which is sitting on my computer. And so
I called you up.
So I decided to do that, in part because, as you know, this Tuesday is August 6th, and there's going to be a mega demonstration at Livermore Labs. Incidentally, which are run by the University of California, and every nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal has been designed at a lab run by the University of California. So I think we need to keep that in mind. It's real close to home. So there's that point. And I really appreciate this, because I think this is much better than my talk would have been. So thank you. And we did this in a spirit, not there's being a debate, there's winners and losers, right. But I think we're both going to win. because we need more informed discussion rather than divisive attacks on each other. But I remain convinced that there's a better way to boil a cup of water than nuclear power. And what I would suggest is that, a truly scientific approach would be to say, okay, here are these 15 ways we can get power.